Imagine, if you will, a photograph from the mid-1970s. It's grainy, black and white, taken somewhere deep in the Ural Mountains. In the foreground, there is a family having a picnic. They are sitting on a patchy stretch of grass, eating bread and sausage. Behind them, looming like a mountain of gray concrete, is a factory. Smoke billows from the chimneys, thick, black smoke that speaks of industry and progress. If you were to ask the father of that family what the factory makes, he would smile proudly and tell you, "It is the People's Factory number 4. They make bicycles for our children and sewing machines for our wives." And he would be telling the truth. If you walked onto the factory floor that morning, you would see assembly lines of sturdy, heavy steel bicycles. You would see crates of sewing machines ready to be shipped to Moscow or Leningrad. But if you stayed there, if you waited until the sun went down and the shifts changed, you would see the lie. Because at night, in the restricted wings of that same building, the heavy steel presses weren't stamping out bicycle frames. They were stamping out the fuselages for jet fighters. The delicate gears being milled weren't for sewing machines. They were for the timing mechanisms of artillery shells. This was the great magic trick of the Soviet Union. It was a shell game played on a continental scale. For 70 years, the USSR managed to hide a war machine of apocalyptic proportions inside the pockets of everyday life. They didn't just build a military alongside their civilian economy. They built a military inside their civilian economy, like a parasite living within a host. Today, we are going to peel back the layers of that deception. We are going to look at how a superpower managed to spend nearly a quarter of its entire wealth on weapons without ever writing it down in the official budget. We are going to explore how they tricked the world, how they tricked their own people, and how, in the end, this massive hidden weight caused the entire floor to collapse. To understand how this happened, we have to step back and look at the mind of a Soviet planner. In the West, in places like America, Britain, or France, we are used to the idea of transparent boundaries. A shoe factory makes shoes. A tank factory makes tanks. If the government wants to buy tanks, they raise taxes, they sign a contract, and everybody argues about the price in the newspapers. It's messy, it's loud, and it's public. The Soviet Union did not have the luxury of public argument. They were born in revolution and lived in constant fear of another war. Stalin and the leaders who followed him believed that the next invasion was always just around the corner. So, they developed a philosophy. They called it dual purpose. Think of it like building a house. A normal architect builds a kitchen to cook food. A Soviet architect builds a kitchen that can be turned into a bunker in 24 hours. They decided that no factory should ever have just one purpose. Every single piece of industrial machinery had to have a secret identity. A pasta factory was designed so that the machines used to dry spaghetti noodles could, with a few adjustments, be used to dry smokeless gunpowder for bullets. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, doesn't it? The idea that your spaghetti is related to ammunition. But in the logic of total war, it makes perfect sense. Spaghetti is just a tube of dough. Gunpowder can be shaped into a tube of chemicals. If the machines are similar, why build two factories when you can build one? This was the genius and the tragedy of the Soviet system. They didn't view the economy as a way to make life comfortable. They viewed the economy as an army in hibernation. There is no better example of this than the tractor. For the Soviet people, the tractor was a holy symbol. It represented the conquest of the land. It meant bread on the table. But for the Soviet generals, a tractor was just a naked tank. In the 1930 seconds, the Soviet Union built massive tractor plants. They were the envy of the industrial world. But the blueprints for these factories had strange requirements. The doorways had to be wider than necessary. The foundations had to be thicker than necessary. The cranes on the ceiling had to lift weights far heavier than any farm equipment. Why? Because the civilian tractors were designed to share the same DNA as the T-34 tank. They used the same engines. They used the same tracks. Here is how the deception worked in the accounting books. Let's say a factory produces 1,000 tractors. The state pays for the steel, the rubber, and the workers' wages. In the official budget, the one they showed to the United Nations, this cost was listed under agriculture. It looked like an investment in farming. But hidden inside that cost was the tooling and the expertise to build armor plating. The civilian factory was actually a military reserve unit. The cost of maintaining that military potential was hidden in the price of the tractor. This meant that Soviet agriculture was incredibly expensive. Not because the seeds cost a lot, but because every bushel of wheat was subsidizing a regiment of tanks. The phantom cost was buried. Imagine buying a loaf of bread at the grocery store. The bread costs $2, but the store owner charges you $10. Why? Because $8 are secretly going to pay for the security guard's machine gun in the back room. You, the customer, are paying for the war without ever knowing it. But hiding money is one thing. Hiding people is much harder. At the height of the Cold War, the Soviet Union had millions of people working directly for the defense industry. How do you hide an army of workers? You make them vanish. The Soviet Union created something called the closed cities. These were cities that did not appear on any map. If you bought a road map in Moscow in 1980, you would see a blank space where a city of 100,000 people stood. No bus routes went there, no trains were listed on the schedule. These cities had cryptic names, often just a word and a number. Chelyabinsk 65, Arzamas 16. Inside these cities, life was different. The shelves in the grocery stores were full, a rare sight in the Soviet Union. The apartments were warm, the schools were excellent. This was the bribe. The government said to these scientists and engineers, "We will give you a comfortable life, a life better than your cousins in the village. But in exchange, you do not exist." In these cities, the deception was total. They weren't just making bullets. They were enriching uranium. They were designing biological agents. And all of it was funded by the civilian budget. The construction of these cities, the concrete, the roads, the power lines, was charged to the Ministry of Medium Machine Building. That sounds boring, doesn't it? Medium machine building. It sounds like they made printing presses or conveyor belts. In reality, the Ministry of Medium Machine Building was the cover name for the nuclear weapons program. By giving it a dull, bureaucratic name, they could hide billions of rubles in plain sight. If a curious accountant asked, "Why does the machine building ministry need so much concrete?" the answer was simple. We are building factories. No one asked what the factories made. Questions were dangerous. Now, we have to touch on something a little more complex, but I promise we will keep it simple. We have to talk about money. In the West, money is a ruler. A dollar is a dollar. It measures value. If a car costs $10,000 and a tank costs $1 million, you know the tank is worth 100 cars. In the Soviet Union, money was not a ruler. It was a suggestion. The government set all the prices. They decided that a loaf of bread costs 10 kopecks, even if it costs 50 kopecks to bake it. They decided that a ton of steel cost 100 rubles, even if it took 1,000 rubles of effort to mine it. This allowed them to manipulate reality. The military paid artificial prices for everything. Let's say the military needed high-grade aluminum for a jet fighter. The real cost of mining, refining, and transporting that aluminum was enormous. But the state simply declared that, for the military, the price was low. Who paid the difference? The civilian sector. The factory that made aluminum pots and pans for regular people had to pay a higher price to make up for the discount given to the military. This meant that the Soviet housewife was paying for the fighter jet every time she bought a saucepan. This created a bizarre world where civilian goods were terrible and scarce because the civilian economy was being bled dry to feed the military vampire. The TV sets exploded because they were made with the reject parts that weren't good enough for the radar systems. The cars rusted instantly because the high-quality anti-rust chemicals were all reserved for the Navy. The people whispered about it. There was a grim joke popular in Moscow in the 1000 980 seconds. A man goes to a department store to buy a vacuum cleaner. The clerk says, "We are out of vacuum cleaners, but I can sell you this box of parts." The man takes the box home and follows the instructions. He puts it together, but it doesn't make a vacuum cleaner. It makes an automatic rifle. He goes back to the store and complains. The clerk shrugs and says, "I don't know what to tell you. No matter how I assemble it, it always comes out as a Kalashnikov." The joke was funny because it was true. The entire industrial soul of the nation was bent toward war. Who were the men orchestrating this? They weren't cackling villains in a dark room. They were serious, gray-faced men in ill-fitting suits. They were the planners of Gosplan. They sat in offices in Moscow with mountains of paper. Their job was to balance the impossible. They had to make sure that people had just enough food not to starve and just enough clothes not to freeze, while pouring every surplus ounce of energy into the military. They became masters of the civilian cover. Let's look at the outbreak of anthrax in the city of Sverdlovsk in 1979. People started dying. It was a horrific disease. The Soviet government immediately announced, "It is bad meat." The people ate contaminated beef from the black market. They stuck to this story for years. They blamed the farmers, they blamed the butchers. The truth, which only came out decades later, was that Sverdlovsk was home to a secret military microbiology facility. A filter on an air vent had been removed by mistake. Military-grade anthrax spores had drifted over the town. But think about the instinct there. The instinct wasn't to evacuate the people. The instinct was to create a civilian cover story. Even their disasters were disguised as civilian failures. The secrecy became a cancer. It meant that safety standards were ignored because security was more important than safety. It meant that environmental damage was ignored because defense was more important than clean water. You might ask, but didn't all this military spending lead to cool inventions? Didn't the internet come from the American military? That is true. In the West, military technology often spills over into civilian life. Jet engines led to commercial airliners. The internet led to, well, everything. But in the Soviet Union, there was a wall, a high, thick wall between the military and the civilian world. The military had the best computers, they had the best scientists, they had microchips that were 10 years ahead of what the public saw. But because of the secrecy, because of the obsession with hiding, that technology was never allowed to cross the wall. A Soviet engineer working on missile guidance systems might invent a brilliant new way to process data. In America, he would quit, start a company, and become a billionaire selling computers to regular people. In the USSR, that was treason. His invention stayed in the secret drawer. It was marked state secret. So, while the Soviet military became incredibly high-tech, the Soviet people were still washing their clothes by hand. The civilian factories were left in the 1,940 seconds, while the secret factories were living in the 1,990 seconds. This is why, when you look at footage of the USSR in the 80 seconds, it looks so strange. You see space stations and supersonic jets, but on the street, people are driving cars that look like boxes and waiting in line for toilet paper. The country had split into two timelines. Then came the breaking point, the invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. War is expensive. Real war, with real bullets and real fuel, burns through money faster than anything else. For decades, the Soviet Union had been stockpiling weapons, but now they were using them, and they were losing them. Helicopters were being shot down. Trucks were blowing up. Every time a helicopter crashed, the factory in the Ural Mountains had to build a new one. But remember, the budget was a lie. The leaders in the Kremlin were looking at reports that said the economy was fine. They believed their own fake numbers. They thought, we have plenty of money. But the real cost was being paid by the civilian factories. To build more helicopters, they had to take the steel away from the refrigerator plant. To make more jet fuel, they had to take the oil away from the heating plants for apartment blocks. The shelves in the stores, already empty, became bare. The lines for bread got longer. The patience of the people began to wear thin. You cannot eat a tank. You cannot live inside a missile silo. The Soviet people were the most heavily armed population on Earth, but they were hungry. In 1985, a new leader arrived, Mikhail Gorbachev. He was younger, sharper. He realized something was wrong. He looked at the American economy, booming, energetic, full of computers and color TVs, and he looked at his own country, which felt gray and tired. He called his top generals and his top economists into a room. He asked a simple question. How much are we spending on the military? Silence. The economists looked at the generals. The generals looked at the floor. They didn't know. The system of hiding the spending inside civilian factories had become so complex, so tangled, that no one actually knew the real number. Was it 15% of the GDP? Was it 20%? Some estimates later suggested it was as high as 40%. Imagine that. Imagine a family that spends 40% of its income on guns, but hides the receipts in the grocery bill, the electric bill, and the mortgage, until even the father doesn't know where the money went. Gorbachev tried to fix it. He tried to convert the military factories back to civilian use. He coined a phrase, conversia, conversion. He told the missile factories, stop making missiles, make milking machines for cows. He told the tank factories, stop making tanks, make fire trucks. But you cannot turn a battleship around in a bathtub. The factories were specialized. The workers were trained to build weapons, not milking machines. The milking machines they built were expensive, clunky, and broke down constantly. The high-quality titanium they used for missiles was too expensive for civilian goods. It was a disaster. The economy didn't just slow down, it seized up. When the Soviet Union finally collapsed in 1991, the curtain fell. The West rushed in. Journalists, economists, and historians walked into those secret cities for the first time. What they found was heartbreaking. They found warehouses the size of football fields filled with titanium parts that had no use. They found thousands of tanks parked in fields, rusting in the rain tanks that had cost billions of rubles to build, money that could have built hospitals, schools, and roads. They found the civilian factories, and they saw the truth. They saw the double floors and the hidden wings. There's a famous story of a Western investor visiting a Soviet radio factory in the early 90s. He picked up a radio. It was heavy, remarkably heavy. He opened it up. Inside, the circuit board was primitive, poorly soldered. But the casing, the plastic box, was incredibly strong. It was blast-proof. The factory director explained, "We didn't have the plastic for consumer radios, so we used the composite material we developed for the nose cones of rockets." That radio is the perfect artifact of the Soviet Union. A piece of military armor, disguised as a household appliance that didn't even play music very well. As we sit here today, looking back at that time, it is easy to judge. It is easy to say they were foolish, but we must understand the fear that drove them. They were a nation that had lost 27 million people in World War II. They swore they would never be caught unprepared again. They loved their children. And in their twisted logic, they believed the best way to protect those children was to starve them of luxuries and build a wall of steel around them. The tragedy is that the wall didn't fall because of an attack from the outside. It fell because the foundation rotted from the inside. The Soviet Union proved that you can hide many things. You can hide a tank inside a tractor factory. You can hide a nuclear city inside a forest. You can hide a war inside a peace treaty, but you cannot hide the truth from the math. Eventually, the bill comes due. So, the next time you see footage of a shiny military parade with the tanks rolling by and the jets screaming overhead, don't look at the weapons. Look at the crowd. Look at their shoes. Look at the buildings in the background. Ask yourself, what is the price of that steel? And where is the cost being hidden? Because history tells us that the most expensive wars are not the ones fought on the battlefield. The most expensive wars are the ones a country fights against itself in the quiet, secret ledgers of its own economy.